call this council meeting to order. All stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Pledge allegiance to the flag,
United States of America.
States of America. To the which stand one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Very pleasant first item on our agenda, which is the swearing in of 3 council members who are starting their terms tonight. Will the 3 of us please rise? If you can't stand very easily, Rich, or you can with your tendon?
No, I'll put my hand up.
Okay, so you can do that, but we'll stand and raise our right arm. And we'll just read it together with our own names.
Okay.
Sure.
I,
I, Rich Brancato, do swear and affirm that I will support
the United States,
States.
and that I will be
That I will
faithful
be faithful to bear true allegiance to the state of Maryland, and support the Constitution and laws thereof. That I will, to the best of my skill and judgment, diligently and faithfully, without partiality or prejudice, execute the office of council member according to the Constitution and laws of this state.
Thank you. Welcome. Rich, welcome to our council.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, I'd like to ask for motions. First, a motion on the positions for the town council members for this coming year. Joy, would you like to?
Yes, I would like to move and propose that the council vote and approve the following slate of officers for the next council. And those officers are for mayor, Barney Rush; for vice mayor, Joel Rubin; for treasurer, Irene Lane; for secretary, Rich Brancato; and for community liaison, Joy White.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second for that motion?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you for the honor of serving again as mayor for all of you. Appreciate it. Also like to entertain a motion for the liaisons for this coming year. Irene, would you be?
Sure. I'm making a motion for the following liaisons. For the Long Range Planning Committee, Joel; for the Land Use Committee, Rich Brancato, excuse me; for the Climate and Environment Committee, Joy White; for the Public Services Committee and Community Relations Committee, myself, Irene Lane; and Barney, our mayor, will be the liaison to the 4-H committee.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second for that motion?
I second.
Joy, okay, thank you. Any discussion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, passes unanimously. We now have our slate and our responsibilities, so we can get to work. Thank you. Thank you all.
Here we go.
Here we go. The first item is the April 20 financial report. However, since our treasurer is all of 2 minutes into her job, Joy is willing to report on that for this month.
Absolutely. Thank you, Barney. And as I've reported many times this year, the town is very fortunate to continue to uphold a strong financial position. We are 83% of the way through FY 22, with about 2 months left to go. And we've already received 99% of our budgeted revenues. But we've just spent a little over 72% of our operating expenditures and only 6% of our capital expenditures. Now, with respect to the capital expenditures, we've really spent minimal amounts on street and sidewalk maintenance. And sometimes those expenses are somewhat lumpy. Those expenses that we expected this year may fall into FY 23. And as we also know, expenditures, the largest capital expenditure in this particular fiscal year was for Zimmerman Park. And due to a lot of the community involvement and changes to the design, the expenditures for Zimmerman Park will fall into FY23. I would also like to mention that since we're going to be discussing the ARPA projects that are fundable under ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act, I would just like to mention that the town received half of its allocation of that ARPA grant earlier this year. And after having given a grant of $125,000 to Wonders Childcare, we have a balance of just over $1 million in our ARPA grant account, and we're expecting another 1.2 million to land in our account in FY23. So we'll have a larger discussion about that later this evening. Now I'd like to turn it over to the town manager to determine if you have anything further to add with respect to our expenditures. And if not, you can go into the town manager's report.
Thanks, Joy. I don't have anything else to add to the treasurer's report. I think you summarized it well.
Joel has a question. Yeah, Joel has.
Thanks. Yeah, and just real quick, and thanks, Joy, for the excellent presentation. Quick question for you, Todd, on legal counsel. Clearly, we've exceeded our budget amount, and I just wanted to know if you could sort of help us break it down in terms of legal counsel, like which lanes it's going in. Is it all 4-H? Is it all? Is that, is there additional? I mean, not obviously not 100% because we got Ron, but like, just can you sort of break that out a little bit?
Sure. The original budget was 75, and we increased it to 100 in anticipation of the representation we had on the MPIA request. We spent about 65,000 on MPIA, so a breakdown of legal counsel line item is Ron at approximately as of today 125 or 120, and our legal representation for the MPIA case at around 65. All 4-H related professional services are under land use planning and development.
Good. That's right. Okay. Thank you. So then we're not, from going forward on legal counsel, we're kind of going to get back to the 100,000 budget, or are we
budgeted for FY23. For FY23, we budgeted 150 for legal counsel in anticipation of more representation and more involvement with Ron, particularly in matters related to 4-H, farm women's market, and those types of projects. So we've increased the budget for next fiscal year starting July 1 at 150.
Right. Okay. Good question to raise.
Yeah.
The MPA request was very expensive.
Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Necessary.
Sure.
Okay. Town manager's report.
Sure. I'll briefly review some of the initiatives undertaken by staff over the past month. Staff assisted with responding to the proposed redevelopment of 7100 Connecticut Avenue, former 4-H property. I want to note that the developers will, on June 2nd at 7 p.m. in the town hall and by Zoom, present an updated concept plan. We anticipate or expect that the updated plan will incorporate revisions based on the town's response to the initial concept plan, which is actually available for review on the town website. We finalized and published.
Do we anticipate that separate from that review on June 2nd, will they be coming back with a written response to our letter?
Yes, you requested that specifically in that meeting. So you've requested a formal response prior to their presentation.
Right. So we should get that, right?
We should.
Yeah. Okay.
Staff finalized the proposed, now the adopted FY23 budget, and we certified the tax rates to the county for the consolidated tax bill, which the county collects on our behalf and returns to the town. We organized and attended the annual meeting and managed the 2022 town election. We submitted the required annual ARPA report, American Rescue Plan Act report, indicating which projects the town has funded with ARPA monies and reflecting the council's decision to take the standard allowance for the provision of government services. We attended discussion with state legislators and SHA officials regarding the Connecticut Avenue needs analysis, which is a document outlining a long-term vision for the corridor by identifying strategies to address pedestrian and bicycle network needs, enhance multimodal safety, and improve travel conditions along the corridor. It's a draft plan. State legislators are, District 18 legislators particularly, are seeking public input to provide to the State Highway Administration, specifically from communities such as the town and its residents. We have put links to the plan and a survey that has been produced by the state legislators on our website, so the residents can visit there to figure out what the plan is and how they can provide input to both the state legislators and the SHA. Tomorrow we have a meeting scheduled with SHA and county officials to discuss the crosswalk signalization on East West Highway at Maple Avenue. As many of you know, several months ago, SHA installed a rectangular rapid flashing beacon for that crosswalk. It's essentially a pedestrian activated yellow warning signal to allow pedestrians to cross over to the north side of East West Highway. All along, frankly, the town considered that a pedestrian activated red signal should be installed at that location. And through use and through a resident survey, we have determined that, in fact, pedestrians don't feel safe using that crosswalk. And we are going to impress upon the SHA officials tomorrow that we would like a hawk signal installed at that location. And the county no longer uses RRFBs on county roadways, 4-lane divided county roadways, because of sightline issues related to pedestrian safety. And so Michael Paler from the Montgomery County Department of Transportation will join us in that meeting with the SHA officials tomorrow to bolster our efforts to switch out that signal from a yellow warning to a red light. I participated in discussions about stormwater management and environmental infrastructure projects with both Councilmember White and several CEC members, Climate and Environment Committee members, and we'll be discussing that issue in greater detail this evening. We continued our spring public and private tree plantings. We have had quite a banner season here. It's the most trees we've planted in any season historically. We're planting 112 trees. 36 on public property in the public rights of way and 76 on private property.
That's great.
So we organized the Trash and Treasures event, which took place on April 30th. We realized and apologized for the household hazardous waste contractor not anticipating demand and discontinuing paint and light bulb collection very early on in the event. I've reached out to the contractor who provided that service to see if they could do a follow-up collection, and they're available on July 16th. And so we have tentatively booked them for that date. And we're going to institute some additional control mechanisms, measures where they've requested, maybe more than requested, they have stipulated that they only will collect from vehicles, that they will not accept walk-up collections. They wear PPE, they're handling hazardous waste. They have to have certain measures in place to protect themselves and to manage the collection process. So they'll only do collections from vehicles. We'll have an appropriate traffic management plan in place with police presence there. And this time around, given the fact that they were overwhelmed during the event, we're going to limit the event to only town residents. So there will be identification checks to ensure that those who are dropping off materials are only town residents. Those who are not will be turned away. As of now, we're planning for the July 16th event to be an event similar to April 30th, which means they'll be collecting all types of household hazardous waste, not just paint and light bulbs, which they discontinued collection early on April 30th. We just received the invoice for this service on April 30th, and the household hazardous waste component costs us $30,000. And if we have an event like this again in July 16th, we likely should expect a similar cost associated with that event, unless the council wanted to consider limiting it to only those materials that were discontinued being collected early on April 30th, namely paint and mercury containing light bulbs. But as of now, we're planning for a full-fledged household hazardous waste event on July 16th, which will be advertised to the community by the forecast and town crier.
Thanks.
Yeah, Todd, thanks for that readout. Question on that is, are these collections solely limited to town residents, or are
Not
they
normally.
open to the general public?
They're supposed to be only for town residents. We've never done identification checks at events like this. So many people attend, and usually it's manageable. This is the first time we ever offered household hazardous waste collection, so we didn't really know what to expect. So they were anticipating about 200 cars, and they got about 400 cars.
I mean, I think it'd be just a thought on that. It'd be really helpful to measure or to tabulate, if it's possible, like what percent or what amount are from the town, what are from out of town. I personally am comfortable with out of town because getting rid of this waste, great. But I think it might be, for future planning purposes, helpful to know sort of what kind of attendance we're getting from the town versus outside of town. I'm not sure what that would lead to directly, but you know, we do obviously during Trash and Treasures have a significant amount of pickup from folks who aren't in the town, which is great. And you know, I'm just wondering how this fits into our footprint within the area beyond the town's borders.
Yeah, it's really up to the council to decide.
Or is it possible? Also, I don't want to drive people nuts.
Well, I'm fearful of their being overwhelmed again if we don't limit it to only town residents. So we have to guard against this potentiality reoccurrence. So my suggestion would be to limit it only to town residents and do identification checks. But that's solely up to the council to decide.
I was going to suggest some of this may have had to do with COVID, and a lot of people took that time to remodel their homes. And so we might be looking at, you know, this event in July, and potentially another one that would clear out a lot of these. In this case, it was paint cans and other things, like other hazardous materials, that it might, quote unquote, calm down after that. So the question for planning purposes, I would be in support of, at this point, limiting it to town residents, seeing what happens next Trash and Treasures. And then if, you know, I agree, it's important to get these materials disposed of properly, and maybe as a future council or whatever can look at opening it up to, you know, everyone else, because it's just the right thing to do. But for definitely for July, and maybe for the next one after that, I would be in support of just limiting it to town residents, because the lines were very long. Many people were turned away, and these were our residents. So I want to make sure we're protecting we're representing our residents first. So.
Yeah, I agree with Irene. You know, this Trash and Treasures is it's a fabulous service that we offer. It's really one of the great benefits of living in this community. It is a service that the town provides. It improves our quality of life. I remember when I moved here, I bought the house from the original owner, and I was so impressed that her house wasn't cluttered, and she told me all about Trash and Treasures. So I agree, this is really something that we provide for our own residents. We, as residents of the town, pay some extra tax. This is one of those things that I think it should be reserved for town residents.
Yeah, I think my own view is probably I would be surprised if the 16th is as expensive as the last event, but we'll find out. But I think what I would suggest is that Trevor or somebody be there to actually do the checking when the cars come into the parking lot. We wouldn't want people waiting, and I don't think it's fair to the people providing the service to ask them to do a check on whether someone's a resident or not. I think it's better for them just to be focused on taking the materials, and the town should take care of whether the person is actually a resident.
Just follow up on that. Being agnostic, I'll say I'll be agnostic on whose waste is allowed to be collected, but I worry about actually executing that. Like if we have cars coming in through the parking lot entrance and they have to have a Town of Chevy Chase parking permit on it to say that you're a resident, and then there's a car that isn't, and then there is one that is, and then Trevor says you can't come in, but you can, and they're jammed.
Oh,
Nightmare.
Let's let the town staff figure that one out. I
Well,
think they can probably.
I mean, I just hesitate to put the town staff in the position of traffic management backing up outside the parking lot, rather than just letting it flow and see what numbers we have and accepting that it's a cost of doing business. Because I mean, people do come into the town to get trash from trash, or the treasurers for trash and treasures. So they know about these events. They're going to come. That's all.
Okay.
Said my piece.
I'm going to leave it with Todd's judgment on the execution of that.
And the
Anything
only
else, Todd?
just that we continued administration of the battery powered blower and rebate program. We've had 135 rebates to date with about a 21,000 expended, and that concludes my staff report.
Okay, good. Thank you, Todd. It's great. All right, public comments. Is there anybody who wishes to make a public comment this time? Deborah, please.
Actually, Deborah
Deborah, could you
Ballmer,
please, introduce-
7202 44th Street. I live
Thank you.
right in back of this building. I didn't come with the idea that I was going to make a comment, but this last discussion prompts me to make one. I really value the collection of hazardous waste. I didn't think of light bulbs and batteries as being hazardous waste. And I know some people just put them in the garbage, but I don't think one should do that. And I had a corner of my kitchen where for quite a while I had been accumulating light bulbs and batteries in particular that were spent, that I was thinking there's got to be a way of recycling this without my driving when I'm not driving, but without finding a way of getting them to some transfer station. So I did. And I got there early and I was able to get rid of my stuff. And I was so relieved that to be rid of it, that I did not ask for the replacement light bulbs. Later I rethought that. I came back, but they were out. They were totally out, but that was okay. But I would like to say that I can understand if in the immediate future, one has to say town residents only, but I would think long range, it would be good to expand it. And I know there are people in this town, myself included. In fact, I have a friend here sitting in the audience who does not live in the town, but she lives in the general area. And I think other people have connections to folks, family or friends who live in the general area who could benefit from some of these services. So I'm just thinking long range, we ought to open it up. And that would be my comment.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Appreciate it. Any other comments? Beth, please go ahead.
Beth Barnett, 4315 Elm Street. As we embark on a new council, I want to throw out an idea that I think is important. And that is that we start working on how we're going to not allow cut through traffic during rush hour. I know, having been on the Public Service Committee, that this is a thorny problem and there are limitations to our rights because our towns roads are county roads. But there was a time that Leland Street was a state highway. And council members who thought out of the box figured out a way to change that. And it's really benefited the residents of Leland Street. And there have been events and actions during the last council's year. And there's also been dramatic growth on Rockville Pike, Wisconsin Avenue, and on Connecticut Avenue. And we're anticipating a lot more residences. And I've been aware now that we are the weak link in being able to cut through between Wisconsin and Connecticut Avenue. When you look at the map of, as you go north from DC, they're just we are the one place where people can cut through. And this is going to be a problem, particularly with the Connecticut Avenue redesign that's in the works. So I think we should be proactive about this and come up with some creative solutions that might involve changing the rules, getting legislation on the county level or the state level, because otherwise we're going to be very vulnerable to bad traffic problems in the future.
Thank you, Beth. I will make a comment that in respect to Connecticut Avenue, many of us have spoken out at a recent meeting against reducing the lanes of traffic, recognizing that if they were reduced, that would definitely cause a lot more cut through the various Chevy chases. And I think there's a unanimous stance of the various Chevy chases in opposition of dieting down the lanes in this lower part of Connecticut Avenue. Okay, anybody else? Okay, thank you. We have no variances tonight, so we turn to council discussions. The first item is stormwater management and environmental infrastructure projects. Let me turn this over to Joy as the liaison to the Climate and Environment Committee, and she'll introduce the topic and introduce our presenters.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you all for your attention. Bear with me. It's going to be a while. I mean, hopefully it's not going to be that long, but we do have a lot of ground to cover. So if you all recall, last year as a town, we had some pretty protracted discussions about the grant that the town was eligible for under the American Rescue Plan Act, which was designed as stimulus and relief to state and local governments in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we had a number of discussions about this. The town council voted to accept the ARPA grant that was coming to us. And we made some decisions about how we would like to spend our ARPA grant. And as a town, we agreed that we would spend the ARPA grant on subgrants to nonprofit organizations that provide services to town residents. And we actually gave one grant to Wonders Childcare, which operates some childcare programs within the town that benefit both town residents and non-town residents. And then we also decided that we would spend or we would focus some of our ARPA grant monies on stormwater management projects and green infrastructure as allowed under the Act. And in response to that, the Climate Environment Committee and Land Use Committee spent quite a bit of time together with town staff looking at a variety of areas within the town that have, over the past several years, seen some damage through excessive flooding and erosion due to much increased stormwater. Our weather has been changing, our climate has been changing. That may likely be the reason for these extreme weather events that we've been seeing in the town. But nonetheless, this is an area that we decided we would look at with respect to expenditure of our ARPA grant. You may also recall that that the town agreed that on a process, an open process, which is similar to other grant processes that we have in the town, that we would, with residents, have an open discussion about how these funds would be used through hearings and so forth. And I think that's entirely appropriate. That is in the spirit of our presentation this evening. And before I get into the actual details of what we're going to talk about today, I just want to say a little bit more about, expend or considering projects with respect to stormwater management before I turn this over to the chairman of the Climate and Environment Committee. But we would like to, one of the reasons when we decided to accept the ARPA grant was, I think there was a strong feeling in the town that we would, these are federal funds that were intended for stimulus, but still we want the expenditure of the funds to provide benefits, not only to residents of the town, but also without the town. And certainly in the case of stormwater management, we're not an island, like water doesn't only fall in the town of Chevy Chase and stay here. It impacts, stormwater management comes to us from other communities, but then everything that flows through the town flows onward through the rest of our watershed. And so I think it's really important for us to keep in mind that anything that we might do that would benefit us would certainly also benefit the quality and quantity of water that leaves the town and those folks in other communities who live there. So now finally, I would like to invite Dan Cloacy, who is the chair of the Climate and Environment Committee, to get into the details of the report that was submitted last year by the council and discussed, and to also touch on some recent developments that we've observed by other communities, as well as some of the committee's own activities. Dan?
Everybody, good evening. And for the folks who are listening in, I'll try to make this as clear as possible. There's
Did
a
he
little,
pick up the mic a bit? Yeah.
okay. There's a little bit of,
heard by the
there's a little bit of jargon involved, but I think everyone will be able to follow. The Climate and Environment Committee, particularly Stuart Sessions, who's here, and myself drafted this in the form of a memo, which I'm going to read. We'll deliver the copy of the memo to you for future reference, and so you'll have your own copy. But I'll just go ahead and read the memo, which kind of summarizes our recommendations on this topic. So as I said, Stuart and I are here presenting this statement on behalf of the Climate and Environment Committee with respect to the intersecting topics of ARPA funds, use, and stormwater management. We'd like to make the following points for consideration. Number one, in June 2021, as Joy was saying, in order to assess possible stormwater management opportunities in town that might qualify for ARPA funding, the CEC and Land Use Committee members presented Town Council with a list of stormwater management trouble areas developed with the help of town staff. In September 2021, the list of the most likely focus areas relating to stormwater management on or adjacent to public property reported to Town Council were the following: the 4-H site redevelopment, Copeland Run, the Farm Women's Market development, a possible stormwater management system engineering study, the Thornapple Street sump area, Rosemary Circle, and Zimmerman Park improvements. So those are the items that were mentioned in the September 2021 memo. So if we go down that list, the Zimmerman Park project is already underway, and it includes some green infrastructure as part of its implementation. The two large projects that are on the list, the 4-H and Farm Women's, are long-term projects that deserve town focus, but which may not qualify for ARPA usage, depending, and will likely not be completed in a time frame to qualify for ARPA funding. And there's some factual information there that one could discuss, but nevertheless, the town should clearly consider stormwater management practices on those two projects, possibly and hopefully including some green infrastructure. And we think the remaining 4 projects from the September 2021 list, which are again, Copeland Run, the Thornapple Sump, Rosemary Circle, and a stormwater management engineering study should all be considered for ARPA funds usage. In addition to the items in the September 2021 memo, on the list that was delivered in June 2021, there were also some private areas in town that were identified with the help of staff as recurring problem areas, if you will, relating to stormwater management. And our understanding is that the ARPA funds, if they're used in a way that support private projects that are used to mitigate stormwater issues, that ARPA funds could be used for those purposes. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute, but we're kind of extending the big items that were on the September 2021 memo and adding at least consideration of what to do about helping with private projects. Again, I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. So we had a nice meeting with town staff, with Dave and Todd and Joy, Stuart and I this week. And at this point, the CEC's position on these various areas is Copeland Run. Let's start with Copeland Run. It deserves focus, ARPA funding or not. It's a large project, which Todd accurately described as more of a stream restoration project than a stormwater management project. And it's got particular complexities relating to private versus public property, town policies, the division of responsibilities and costs among the town, county, residents, and possibly even the state. So in addition to that, the full project would clearly exceed the total ARPA funding that the town will be receiving. And it's going to be a long-term project. So, you know, Copeland Run should be looked at as a project, but likely not going to fall within the ARPA parameters. However, an engineering review of that area might discover some smaller scale improvements that could be done as an interim measure and which could utilize ARPA funds. So that's Copeland Run. The Thornapple Sump is a project that also deserves town attention. Water volumes there sometimes exceed the capacity of the existing stormwater gray infrastructure. The county installed and maintained, it's called the gray infrastructure, the underground stormwater infrastructure. But as things are right now at the county, we're not likely to get much help from them in any reasonable time frame. And like Copeland Run, a full solution of that issue in the Thornapple Sump would easily consume all of the ARPA funds. But again, an engineering review might discover some smaller scale ARPA eligible, let's call them green infrastructure projects that could potentially be done as an interim measure. It's indeterminate and there are definitely issues to consider, but an engineer could give us a professional evaluation. Rosemary Circle is another area where the volume of water sometimes overwhelms the stormwater, the gray stormwater capacity. And so it's kind of similar in that sense. Again, an engineering review would maybe uncover smaller scale projects that could be done to mitigate the issue. But it's similar to Thornapple Sump in the sense that the county maintains the infrastructure and we're not going to get prioritized or funded necessarily by the county on any timely basis. But maybe we can look at some mitigations there. And then I'm now going to the last of the 4 items that were left from the September 2021 memo. So the engineering study. Some of you may be aware that in some of the neighboring communities, Todd actually made me aware of both of these, but in Somerset and Chevy Chase View, they've now completed or in the process of completing pretty significant stormwater reviews for their communities. And as part of that, they completed in some form or fashion a townwide or community-wide review of their stormwater situation. There are details available that can be looked at in terms of what was done and what their situations are. Their situations are a little different than the town of Chevy Chase. But I'm mentioning it only in the sense of one approach the town could take with an engineering study is a town-wide review and kind of step back and have an engineer look at the town. We know what the sort of the particular problem areas are, but it's probably been a while since the whole town has been looked at in some. But the other alternative is what I've mentioned a couple of times now is maybe there's an opportunity for a more focused engineering study. I think that's a decision point for council around an engineering study, how big, what type, where, those kind of things would need to be decided. And I think where the CEC sits for right now is that a smaller, more focused study or study of particular areas decided by the council would be more appropriate than starting with a townwide study. One of the other benefits of that is with the ARPA funding, there's the timing issue. So we know that funds have to be committed by 2024 and have to be spent by 2026. So it seems like it's 2026 in particular seems like a long way away, but that's going to come pretty quickly. But the engineer could be sent off to look at Copeland Run, Thornapple Sump, Rosemary Circle, as well as perhaps these private land areas that were on the June 2021 list. I'll call them micro neighborhoods, to see what recommendations a professional would make in terms of a public solution, a potential private solutions, or even in some cases, public/private combined solutions. All right, so that takes us kind of through the information that was in the original September 2021 report. The last part I'll speak to is kind of summarizing the CEC's recommendations for where to go. Number one, use some of the ARPA funding to do an engineering study. Again, deciding on what scale that will be, but some type of engineering study or projects. And again, our immediate recommendation would be a smaller scale or smaller scale type of projects. A limited study could be geared toward developing recommendations for these smaller scale mitigations that the town could do in the public right of way in some cases in order to reduce the impact of stormwater flows in the 3 public areas. Those mitigations could include green infrastructure components similar to those that we observed in the Sligo Park Hills tour that we took in the readout that you all received. But obviously taking into consideration, we have gray infrastructure and town right-of-way issues. The town rights-of-way that we might want to use for green infrastructure are going to need to look, in order to do something in the town rights-of-way, we have to look at resident input. We have to look at underground utility conflicts, tree locations, et cetera. So even though we may want to do something green infrastructure-wise in a particular area, it may be difficult depending on what the engineer says and what the limitations are. So that would need to be looked at. But the hope would be that there'd be some areas in these problem areas that would be amenable to some type of green infrastructure solution. Number 2 is use some of the ARPA funding as part of a reinstituted Rainscapes project matching and technical assistance program. And some of you have been in town for a while may be familiar with this. I am not, but Todd has indicated that there was a prior program where the town matched Rainscape funds and provided technical assistance, I think including some technical funding support to encourage residents to do private green infrastructure kind of projects. And clearly the private projects that could be done could go a long way to mitigating some of the stormwater management issues that we have in town. And there's you know, in most of these problem areas in town, it's the water flowing off the private properties that's creating the issue. So if you can mitigate the issue and maintain more water on the private properties, that's going to go a long way to helping. So it makes sense to put a focus there. And I think the task there would be to take a look at the prior program and how to re-gear it, perhaps for the current situation. The Rainscapes program with the county is currently on pause because they're oversubscribed. And so that's something that we would need to look at in terms of how we might re-gear the prior program that the town had done, because previously it was a matching program. So anyway, hopefully they'll restart at some point, but we'll have to have an engagement with the county on the Rainscape component of that. And I'm using the word Rainscapes. Rich, I hope you're familiar with Rainscapes, which is the county private.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So that's a strong recommendation, though, that we take a look at that program. And again, Todd's been an advocate for that in terms of something that had worked in the past, and it can be applied again. The next item is to engage with the county, and this could be through the CEC, you know, potentially through staff as well. But Stuart and I had a previous conversation with the county about a possible pilot program that they were interested in doing in some particular neighborhoods, or again, I'll call them micro neighborhoods, because I don't mean town, I mean a micro neighborhood within town, where they can do some focused Rainscape projects and do a before and after to see, are these Rainscape projects having a benefit that's measurable? And if so, what is the benefit? Where were the flows before the projects were done, and what happened to the flows afterward? That was something that they were very interested in doing. I don't know if they're still interested, but we recommend engaging with the county on that. And that could potentially be coordinated somehow if we do this program, a matching program on funding with Rainscapes. You know, again, that could be all part of the discussion. The next item would be leverage as much as possible the learnings and resources available from the neighboring towns. Again, Todd had made us aware of the extensive work that Somerset has done, and Chevy Chase View has also done some significant work. There's a resource guide, for example, from Somerset that they provided for their residents that the village is also now using. They got permission to use. We don't need to recreate the wheel, and we can hopefully partner together as we do on other projects with these neighboring communities to share resources and benefits. Okay. The next item is we're aware that there's work going on stormwater ordinance changes or research, and you know, obviously that can help to a certain extent in mitigating stormwater impacts, both among neighbors when there's a new construction that's going on, but more broadly within the town, and then also, as Joy was saying earlier, outside of the town. One example that other jurisdictions have looked at is what are the triggers that require a stormwater plan to be put in place, especially considering that the county sometimes is relaxed about the requirements for stormwater mitigation or stormwater retention. So anyway, that's just an example. I'm sure that the committee members that are looking at have good ideas. And then our last item to close the memo is we recommend that the stormwater management as a topic gets discussed in terms of governance. And so what we see is stormwater is in at least 3 committees. There are policies, programs, ordinances. There's the consulting water engineer program. If we do this new program, there's the water board, there's new construction requirements and all things like that. And there are reasons why things roll out that way over time. But it seems like it's a good time to at least step back and think about, is there a different way that could be done or would be done better? In Somerset, they formed I don't know, you call it a standing committee, but they had a committee that worked for a long time on the project that they did in Somerset that was formed specifically to focus on stormwater. There's a bit of a technical aspect to the stormwater type of projects where you need people who are, if they're not immediately knowledgeable about it, like people like Stuart are, if it's people like me, I need time to learn about it and educate myself to come up to speed on in thinking about the issues. So it's going to be a long-term issue, and these projects are going to be going on for quite a while. So maybe a committee would make sense. Also, since the other two large projects are also going to be going on for quite a while, and there might be advice requested around the 4-H project or the Farm Women's Market project, the committee could also play a role in helping support those projects. Respectfully submitted.
Thank you very
And
much.
appreciate your patience, and we'll get a soft copy to everybody. So everyone has a copy.
Thank you very much, Dan and Stuart, for that very thoughtful work and pulling all that together. That was awesome. Very good ideas and thoughts. Joy, do you want to open up for discussion? How would you like to proceed?
Absolutely. Yes. Thanks again, Dan and Stuart. I know you worked hard and very quickly to pull all those thoughts together. And it's really great to kind of refresh our memory and also set the stage for the discussion. So with that, I would very much like to open this up to my colleagues on the council and get their thoughts, comments, views on what's been presented to you tonight.
Rich, I'm looking at you.
Okay. Well, I had two thoughts. First of all, Dan and Stu, you did a great job of summarizing all the other work you've done. My first thought is that we need to get cracking with hiring a professional to look at do that quickly. We're going to bump up against the ARPA deadlines. But the other thought I had was, I remember our Tolbert Feather had talked about our tree canopy and the threat of the dying off of some of the canopy because of some water issues. And I wanted to ask Dan and Stu, is it possible that we loop in the forester into these, assisting and looking at these projects in terms of what they would do to the tree canopy and the vegetative canopy in the town?
The answer is definitely yes, and I think that's a great suggestion. And as we think about, as an example, as we think about doing green infrastructure in the public right-of-way, the public right-of-way has almost everywhere has plantings, trees. So just for those particular projects, it would need to be looked at very specifically. In terms of the more general issue, I don't know whether the tree impacts are looked at when a Rainscape project is put together, but certainly something that ought to be considered in terms of the water flows. I don't know how we would build that in exactly, but that makes sense to do, because depending on what you do with the stormwater, you're potentially affecting your trees or neighbors' trees, that type of thing, or other plantings. So I think it makes sense.
To answer that, tree protection requirements of the urban forest ordinance are applicable whether or not the project requires it. So we do tree protection reviews for grading projects in local.
Just to echo and ask on that though, Rick, so the concern is that the flooding is killing the roots of the old growth trees?
Well, it's not just the flooding. I think Tolbert highlighted some areas in the town where it may not be a stormwater management issue, but it could be just a saturation issue as well, where some of the trees are getting overburdened by the water table in the area. So what you don't want to do is put retention areas and areas where the trees are threatened because of that saturation already. So it just needs to be coordinated with, maybe Tolbert giving them a briefing of where he thinks the trees in town are jeopardized by too much water.
Joel, is there anything else?
Yeah, no, I mean, I just, a couple of thoughts. First of all, again, thanks, Joy, for organizing this, pulling this all together, and Dan and Stuart and your team for a really clear and thought-provoking presentation. I really like the idea of us finding ways to support financially projects that may be on private property, but have a community impact. And this would definitely fall within that lane. So just want to put that out there, that if it ends up over time after studies and reviews that there are needs to support some type of stormwater management activity on a private property, I think it's worth putting public funds into that, because it benefits beyond just the boundaries of the private home itself. It has an impact to the broader community. And I'm intrigued by this question of projects and identifying projects, but to Rich's point, I'm not quite sure. I like your ranking. I'm just not sure if that's right or not. Right. Like, and so I'm not saying that you're wrong and the ranking makes sense, but I am a little bit, I am cognizant of the comprehensive study idea as being a way to really give us certainty about where we could invest in project activities if we go to moving in physical activities. So I'm liking this idea of some kind of firm, and maybe we can get some types of proposals potentially from firms that do this on a comprehensive basis to get a feel for what this actually means. I don't know what that means in terms of money or funds or timing and whatnot, but I do think there may be areas that we're not aware of, or there may be, and we may know it already now. But I do like the idea of having a fuller comprehensive study as well to make sure that we're addressing this right, because it's clear. I was trying to come up with a pun, but I failed. But the tide is rising, or we're flooded with these issues, or something bad like that. But this is definitely stormwater's an issue that's not going to recede. How about that? That was good.
You're all wet, Joel. You're all wet.
Did it? Okay, I'll stop.
Irene.
Thank you. And thank you, Dan, and Stuart as well, for all of your hard work here. So I have a lot of thoughts on this. I would like to explore the possibility of doing an engineering study. I read through the Somerset study, which was fascinating. And for those in the audience that may not have had a chance, essentially the Somerset study was done by a group of Somerset residents. It wasn't a professional firm, that took 18 months, give or take, to figure out kind of defining the stormwater management problems, analyzing efficacy, costs, and benefits of potential solutions. One thing that stood out for me was that they had surveyed their residents, and collectively residents had spent $3 million towards stormwater management efforts that weren't actually effective. And so that's a huge number. And some of the issues that came about was that the residents may have installed something but not maintained the solution. So that's, kind of an educational thing. Some of the things they found out was that unlike our building requirements, they had, if you will, a little bit looser construction and regulation requirements than we have. And that part of the study was kind of strengthening that. For example, one of the things that they offer that we don't is when someone has installed some sort of stormwater management solution, there's an annual inspection done by Somerset Town staff at the homeowner's expense to make sure that it's operating properly. It's like an educational thing. It's not meant to be, I think, a violation citation, more so educational. These were really fascinating things. The Chevy Chase View, though, went about hiring Clark Azar, which is the same folks we're using that put together the nice plan for Zimmerman Park. And it's in our packet that there's a decent proposal there that gives 70,000 as an estimated cost. My recommendation would be there would be a few more things added to such a proposal, but in general, I'm very supportive of having an engineering study done just so that we can identify the smaller projects, the bigger projects, and then those that are going to be so cost prohibitive, but it's important that we know about them, the county knows about them, and we're on the record about it. In the meantime, I do agree with Joel that we need to address in the short term right now today, residents are having issues with stormwater management, and it could be some education. It could be if the Rainscapes is oversubscribed. It's unclear to me if it's oversubscribed for this year and they're going to restart it next year, or it's just oversubscribed. I don't, that's the first I heard was for that tonight, but nonetheless, I like the idea in general, since we do have this ARPA money of establishing some sort of a match in place, recognizing full well that in Somerset, which is a different community than ours, spent $3 million collectively and they didn't really attack this problem. So we'd have to be very careful. And then comes my overarching argument is that, okay, we have these ideas of short, medium, and long-term strategies. The engineering study in conjunction with what the arborist might say, to Rich's great point, there's a lot of coordination that's going to be needed at a town staff level. So I'm kind of going in the direction to say, even if individual residents are going to have wonderful stormwater management projects that will hopefully benefit their neighbors as well as themselves, there needs to be some like right hand knows what the left hand is doing coordination at the town level of what is working, what is not working. So I'm kind of now going in direction as well as of ensuring whether it's someone that's going to be a contractor that would be working specifically on stormwater management issues, or someone eventually hired to just handle this, since it is not receding anytime soon, that we really think seriously and about adding to this town staff that would focus on this particular topic, so that we're handling it holistically. Holistically, I mean, again, from the recommendations that might come out of a study, what residents are doing, what's happening with our ordinance, should it be strengthened or given the potential issues that arise between what the county is saying, what the town code has, and what the water board decides every now and then. Basically, we need a person coordinating all of that. So I'll stop now, but that's where I'm at.
One of the pleasures of turning over a subject to somebody else in the council, it means I don't have to speak last. I can speak before. Again, thanks very much for the report. And I'll just echo some of what's been said. I think absolutely we need to hire somebody to look carefully at the different projects. Let me take the few that I want to speak to. On Copeland Run, first, I know that the county also does engineering, so there may be an opportunity, as I understand from Todd, that you could ask the county to do some of the engineering work there. So that's something that, obviously, if the county would, let's take advantage of it. But otherwise, certainly our consultant should. And I would like very much to see, as you put it, Irene, kind of breaking it down so that we can see some different bite-sized projects out of it, and some that are truly more urgent than others. Actually, I went over this afternoon to take another look at it. And really, there's just before you get to the culvert that goes under Lynn Drive, there are some very strong stone stonework on the south side facing, of land, which looks in good shape. But as we may all recall from our walk there, last year, there's then a stretch, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 feet, maybe more, where the Copeland Run, when it floods, bends around and is really tearing out the earth and eroding back toward Lynn Drive. Now, there's a reasonable distance, there are some trees, but it's just a matter of time. And it seems to me that this ARPA money is exactly what we should be, is the right kind of thing to be using it for, saying here's an infrastructure project that the town is going to need. The money is here to help us do it. And you could debate whether we should do it now or 5 years from now, but let's do it now and get it done, and it'll be cheaper to do it now and we'll all feel more comfortable. But I think that's something that I could see as being kind of a bite-sized piece, separate from any broader issues of Copeland Run as a whole, but stands alone as its own project that would make sense, and certainly could be planned and executed in the time frame necessary under the time limits that we know are there for the funds, as Dan said. So I think that, to me, is a really very strong probability for a good project. I think looking hard at what can be done to also improve stormwater management at Rosemary Circle, and also the triangle below Rosemary. That also would be an interesting project, and potentially another reasonable bite size out of the ARPA money. I do support an engineering study, as I said, so that would be a piece of it. I think on the Rainscape program, I could be in support of it, but I would also welcome the engineer helping us understand its value in respect to Rainscapes. I think, as I understand it, Rainscapes could do potentially two different things. One is they can basically help purify the water, but the water might still flow into the stormwater management system. Alternatively, they could actually hold the water, and the water actually percolates down into the soil right there on the yard and does not go into the stormwater management system. But I think it would be really helpful to know, if we take, for example, the sump area that we're so concerned about at Thornapple, which we all have seen is probably the worst case flooding this town has had, that if you drew a circle around the watershed that ultimately drains into that sump, it's some number of homes. I don't know what it is, 100, 115, 120, I don't know, but some number of homes. And it would just be useful if our engineer could help us in saying, look, a single rain garden on a single lot can, in a heavy storm, absorb this amount more water. You could then sort of do the math and say, okay, if out of these homes, 20, 30, 40 of these homes actually did something with a rain garden, we could actually see a material mitigation of the amount of water that would flow into the stormwater management system. It would just be useful to get a sense of that. I'm not saying it's positive. It doesn't mean I would oppose the program if it didn't make that much difference, because it might help in purifying the water anyway, and that in itself is a good thing. But on the other hand, in terms of being able to answer questions about how much difference such a program can make to actually reduce flooding, we need some metrics to help us there. And so I think it'd be useful that the study help provide that. So those are the thoughts I have. I think it all does start off with a engineer or a study. And I guess what I might propose is that if perhaps, Joy, you could have further conversations with Todd and Dave and the committee, and try to scope out what that terms of reference would look like, and then perhaps come back to the council and ask for us to consider it. That would be my recommendation. So we could really get some momentum and really see some results, because until we actually end up with it's very hard for the council to do anything until we actually have some specific projects costing a certain benchmark amount of money that we can actually appropriate. And I think that's the goal we should be trying to head towards.
Thank you. Joel?
One more thing, just to make sure we don't lose it in between the really good discussion, is the governance and management and staffing of this, to make sure that we're thinking that through as well. I mean, I don't know what the right answer is as far as committees and as far as staffing. Defer to Todd and his acumen on that, but I do think it's worth thinking through as we go forward in the process, because a multi-committeed management process might make things harder rather than easier. I'll put it that way. But
I think the governance is a good point. To make sure it's all coordinated one way or another is important. So take that on board. We ought to think about that.
I also just want to clarify a point here. I'm a little concerned that not in the fact that of doing a study, but the timing of it. And so if we're trying to get to some, which I think is needed, some level of specificity, it might take upwards of 8 months to gather this information before we have our list of projects, many of which, and this is just kind of a gut feel, might be very cost prohibitive anyway. I feel like today people are facing stormwater management issues today. And I do feel that we should, in parallel, look into something that allows for people to, the burden, the financial burden of fixing some of the issues on their properties might be eased by some ARPA funding set aside. I'm not saying it has to be like the whole thing or majority of it, but some aspect of it to get started on these issues, because whether it's projects that will retain the water on their property or filter through the water, it's still going to be better than we have today. And while we wait for this study that's going to come up with much larger price tag options, I'd like to do something for residents now. So I'm just going to reiterate that.
Thanks for acknowledging that, Irene. And I can appreciate all of the comments that have been made, and it's hard to really disagree with any of them. If I may summarize, it sounds like what I heard from you all is that we want to take advantage of, certainly time is of the essence. We have this grant. There are areas that we could possibly offer some relief to residents most immediately. However, there are also areas that we know these are long-term issues. They've been long-term issues. I mean, the Thornapple sump has been there. Rosemary Circle has been there. We've seen issues over several years. And I would like to say, now that I'm handing off my treasurer's hat to someone else, and I would like to acknowledge we did have a resident make some comments about green infrastructure, to the extent that whatever infrastructure you put in place, it has to be maintained. So even if we could wave the magic wand and use our ARPA grant to install green infrastructure where it might be helpful, that infrastructure on public or private property would need to be maintained over a long-term basis. And that's probably a call on our reserves. Like, that's what we have reserves for, is to maintain our assets within the town and continue to provide for a very high quality of life here. So I would also say I think where we're coming down on is to try to give the town staff some direction in terms of advising us on a scope of work, and perhaps engaging an engineering firm to do maybe some site specific, give us some advice on some particular sites that the town staff has been long aware have been creating some problems, such as Copeland Run. As well as, we know we're going to have to deal with this on a longer term basis. And so we probably also foresee that we would want to engage an engineering firm to do a comprehensive study of the town, that, not just of the Copeland Runs and Rosemary Circles, but really looking at our topography, our watershed, what's going on with properties, and that also looking at the governance issues with the water board, the consulting water engineer program, and so forth. Those are, and perhaps our water ordinance, those are also longer term issues that we're going to be grappling with long after the ARPA money has been spent.
Can I ask a question, Joy, because forgive me for not remembering the process, but in terms of those who want to obtain a grant from ARPA right now, is it an open door rolling basis currently, or?
That is correct.
So in theory, somebody could, a homeowner could apply for a grant if we authorize this type of funding to be spent, right? Like a homeowner could come to the town and say, I want X number of dollars to execute a stormwater management project in my backyard. Am I mistaken in that?
I think
Just trying to
you're,
connect the
yeah.
dots.
So from what, and Ron, you could chime in here, correct me if I'm wrong. One of the things that we asked about last year when we were considering the list of potential solutions that was, that were proposed by by climate and environment and land use committees was the, standing up of a program similar to our tree canopy program, which, by the way, is a green infrastructure program. And so that, the town subsidizes maintenance and also planting of trees on private property. And so, Ron, can I ask you, because I asked you about this, if we could do stormwater management in the same way?
Yeah, I think that would be a permissible program. Other towns have discussed something similar where, like you said, it would be a grant application because stormwater is often a difficult issue, and given the intensity of development and intensity of storm events, I think the best practice would probably be like a grant rather than a consulting engineer setup whereby the homeowner selects their own experts so that the town's not making a representation as to the effectiveness of any program or the qualifications of any expert. But homeowners would be able to select their own experts and design plans and then seek contribution from the town. That would certainly be permissible.
Thank you.
I have perhaps a slightly different view on this particular point. First, I do think the engineer would be able to come up with projects on some of the major publics or that we've talked about, like Coke and Run and Rosemary, and I hope they could do it in less than 8 months. We'll see, but I'd imagine it wouldn't take that long. But in any event, I think when it comes to the question about our help putting together a program for homeowners, I would still like us to be really careful and thoughtful about it. And I know you aren't suggesting we shouldn't be, but I think it's going to take time to put it together. It's not something we can start immediately. We have to define what we mean by a stormwater management project, what would be acceptable, what wouldn't. It doesn't mean we cover any plantings. It doesn't mean we cover putting in pipes that put water onto the street. There has to be some boundaries of what we really mean by the term. And maybe, Ron, if you have examples of other municipalities that have dealt with this, hey, that'd be great. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. But I think we have to be very thoughtful about what we're really trying to promote and make sure it's very distinct from just a general landscaping project. And then I think we also have to be thoughtful about what is the percentage of the cost that we would cover. I feel strongly that this is a collaborative process and we would be helping but not taking over or doing an undue amount. So that's going to take some thought. And we've obviously used that in the battery powered leaf blower program. But I think basically really getting a good understanding of what we're really trying to achieve with this and what would be impactful to the town is important for us before we could launch such a program. And that'll take some time. And frankly, I would like to hear what a consulting engineer would say about that. So if it means it takes, I don't know, use your number 8 months, then I'm more comfortable doing that than I am kicking something off too quickly and feeling that we've not defined it carefully enough. That's just me.
And Mr. Mayor, if I could just add quickly, another consideration to add to that list is potential coordination with the county to the extent private improvements impact or feed into the county stormwater system. A rain garden would be one thing, but if, for example, someone wanted to discharge or pipe into the county system underground, county approval would of course be required. And typically there, the county requires execution of a maintenance agreement, which is recorded in land records. So based on the scope of the projects folks are proposing, there might be some coordination needed with the county.
May I ask if Todd has any comments?
Thank you all. Can I ask for some input from Todd or Dave as well?
Well, I would structure a program for private property improvements very similar to what the Rainscapes program is. The Rainscapes program is on a pause until July 1. It's the new fiscal year. They've paused until July 1. If we stand up a program similar to Rainscapes, there's not a lot we need to do.
Okay, I was thinking of something broader, but yeah, if it's just Rainscapes, that's easier. I agree with that.
Yeah, we can borrow from all of their documentation, which is voluminous on their website. We can approve similar devices that are eligible to be rebated under the program. We could do it alone, or we could do it in conjunction with the Rainscapes program. It's effective July 1, so it's only effectively a month and a half away. You know, the residents will double their benefit by participating in the Rainscapes program and then piggybacking on the town's rebate and technical assistance. But I don't think here we need to recreate the wheel. We either emulate Rainscapes or we piggyback on it.
Do you have any other comments, Todd, regarding you know, a way forward in terms of, you know, engaging a firm to look at maybe some specific locations versus, or in addition to a, you know, a town-wide survey?
I think in the immediate term, we do a, you know, site-specific study. We know what we need to do with Copeland Run. Dave's already reached out to the Montgomery County department that deals with this, the watershed division, and is requesting technical assistance to, it's probably not going to require a lot of engineering. It's a riprap of a stream channel, about 30 feet upstream. We likely will be able to obtain engineering support from the county. So Dave's researching that and looking into that. It's what we did almost 15 years ago or more. We partnered with the county. They did the engineering work and we paid for the improvements to riprap that part of the embankment that was undermining or threatening to undermine Lynn Drive. We can do the same thing moving forward in this instance. Now, I caution the council about doing studies of certain sumps. Obviously, these are systemic issues and they need to be addressed systemically. I've reached back out to Chris Conklin at MCDOT to ask him what the status of our DAR request was, our drainage assistance request. When we had the June floodings last year, 2020. So almost 2 years ago, we reached out to the county, asked them to study these areas, and they're all interconnected areas. So they all are dealing with the same amount of water volume. It's all interconnected storm drain system there that affects Thornapple up to Leland and then under Zimmerman and under East West Highway. They're all interconnected. And so we can study these issues and engineer them ourselves, but the county will not rely on our engineering support to determine what improvements ultimately might be made and whether they're even willing to make them. The county still designs to a 10-year storm event. And I'm not certain they're going to be willing to come in and design to a 100-year storm event or anything above what their design standards currently call for. And so I don't want to throw good money after a bad outcome here in terms of having the town take this on when it will not be accepted by the county and no effect there will be no effective outcome. I think at least at this point, we need to lean on the county a little more heavily with respect to the capacity of the storm drain system in town, especially that affects Thornapple Sump. And we need to see how they'll move forward on that and to escalate it as need be and to put pressure on them to actually get to this analysis and see what can be done. And I think with respect to discussions with the Climate and Environment Committee that we had yesterday, I think we did indicate, that at least the initial first step in addressing issues of Copeland Run, Zimmerman stormwater management, potential stormwater management devices, and improvements in renovations that will be occurring in Rosemary Triangle, and one other, and the resurrection of the Rainscapes program to assist homeowners with improvements on private property that will ultimately impact and improve the quality and quantity of stormwater that ultimately gets to the system, are the sort of 4 programs I see discreetly moving forward with at this time.
An engineer would be needed for, I guess you're saying probably not for Copeland Run, or at least the county could do it, but we would want someone looking at the Rosemary Triangle and seeing what needs to be done there, right?
Yeah, what I would suggest, I know the Climate and Environment Committee is putting together a plan that's going to propose to the council about what we do in Rosemary Triangle. We know Clark Azar is already incorporating stormwater management devices and stormwater management best practices in Zimmerman. I would assume that we would probably lean on them again to engineer improvements to Rosemary Triangle, and they can do that there as well. Like I said, Dave's reaching out to the county for engineering support for Copeland Run, and I've then pressed Chris Conklin to get us an answer for the drainage assistance request for the storm drain issues we were experiencing along that specific alignment. So I think discreetly, those are really projects we can push forward now if the council's on board with that. But a system-wide stormwater management study, it'll take a while. There are capacity issues with Clark Azar. I understand they wouldn't be able to start such a study for a couple months. It might take quite some time. Chevy Chase View has not even begun their study. They actually applied for a grant from DNR to actually have the cost of the study compensated by the state, which is to the tune of about $70,000. And then, as I understand it, they received the grant and they're going to be moving forward with the study. I don't know how long that will take. There might be an indication in the proposal that Clark Azar submitted to them as to how long it will take. I'd have to refer to it again. But that's a much longer term project, and whether it's needed, I suppose, needs to be fully vetted and discussed. But we know problem areas now, anecdotally and observationally. And we can certainly move forward with Copeland Run. We know Zimmerman Park's being engineered right now. Rosemary Triangle is coming up, and certainly the Rainscapes program could be stood up as early as, July 1 if we want to piggyback on the county's program.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Thank you, Todd. So I think what I've heard you say is that, you can work with us on trying to engage a firm to look at these particular problem areas and maybe come back to the council for our next meeting with, a proposal basically close to the process that we set out last fall with respect to expending part of our ARPA grant for further consideration and discussion by the council. I think, we've discussed a lot of different possibilities, and it'll be really helpful for us to talk about something that's a little bit more concrete and focused.
I think,
So
Sue,
Can I offer a quick comment? Yes.
please go to the
Can
podium, though.
can you go to the microphone?
I'd like to offer one perspective that ends up in the same place as to a large degree where Todd was talking. One of the things we are interested in looking at potential uses of the ARPA money is trying to leverage that money and get more bang for the buck by drawing additional investment from other sources. And when there are two other places that can contribute One is the county, very definitely, and one is homeowners themselves can contribute some of their money to solving town-wide or beyond town stormwater problems. And with respect to sort of getting money out of the county or getting cooperation, leveraging county funds, there are very different perspectives on that in different parts of the county. And the stormwater infrastructure people, my sense is, as Todd has been saying, will in general look negatively on us saying the gray infrastructure needs to be improved. You need to design to different design storms than you have previously, or in Chevy Chase View's situation, some of the infrastructure is crumbling and you need to prioritize improving that rapidly. But another part of the county is very willing to contribute, and that is the people who are worried about keeping precipitation on people's property. And the county is under very strict requirements in their federal permits to reduce the amount of impervious surface countywide, essentially. So they have milestones and reports due on the extent to which they have reduced impervious surface. And that's the reason why the Rainscapes program exists, for example, and other things the county does. And those folks in the county will be, I think, quite willing to cooperate with us if and put in some of their money and technical assistance to the extent we go for things that tend to keep precipitation on private properties rather than conveying it rapidly out to the storm sewers and getting it out of here. So that's a perspective on the county. Perspective on homeowners is to the extent they've got skin in the game somehow, they'll put money into it. And for example, with regard to maintenance of green stormwater investments, Sligo Park Hills has an interesting situation in that their green stormwater investments are on the public right-of-ways, and it's maintained by the county DOT, and that's a tricky issue. The county DOT is not fully happy in doing that, and there's some complaints about the quality of maintenance, et cetera. On the other hand, if you think of a Rainscapes project on a person's lot, some of that may well involve landscaping, and the homeowner, at least the homeowner who's proposed it, has an interest in keeping that up and keeping it going and contributing money in the first place to it. So anyway, that's a general point about sort of trying to leverage funds that are available.
Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent point.
I'd like to wrap this up.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't know if we need a resolution, but if I understand the direction we're heading in, quite specifically, it's that in regard to Copeland Run, we're going to be asking the county to see what engineering they can do, and we'll hear back from management next month, I guess, on the status of that. But I think there's the sense of the council that if it turns out that that's not forthcoming, then we'd like to have it undertaken anyway and just proceed with it. I guess you'll ask Jason Azar to see if they can add on a component of work to cover Rosemary for what could be done there to help set out that project. Is that the sense that we have? You've already gone back to DOT to ask about where they stand in looking at the system-wide issues. And I guess perhaps Joy with your committee can help think about what would be the restitution of a Rainscape program, working with town management to present to us at the next town council meeting, and what that looks like, what it might be in terms of dollars and limits per household and so forth, and be prepared to make a proposal. Is that all right? And I guess to my point that I had made, if there's other things about stormwater management outside of the, I mean, the rainscape, I think Todd's made an excellent point. That's already been a box that's been defined before, so that's easy to bring back. But if there were other things to do beyond that, that would require, I think, a longer term review of what would be helpful to us. But I think if it's just the rainscape, that's fairly straightforward. Does that summarize things? All right, good. Thank you all very much. Good. And I'm moving on the agenda. There aren't that many more items. I think we can cover them quickly and let some people who are up very, very late go to bed. On the Farm Women's Market, I just want to give a quick update to the town. Irene and I participated last week in a phone call that involved the developers, EYA and Bernstein Management Company, Chris Conklin and his team from the Department of Transportation, and Mike Riley and his team from the Parks Department and the town. So we're sort of the four parties to all this, if you will. I suppose to the good, everybody was all smiles, saying they felt that the financial plan had come together, and that the county executive has signed off on a material amount of support that they were prepared to ultimately put into a request, would be an amendment to the capital investment plan, the CIP, which they would hope to be able to submit by the beginning of June. The budget apparently has to be approved by the end of May, but no one seemed troubled about the thought that you could put an amendment immediately after the budget had just been approved. But in any event, the general sense was that this should be enough. There's also apparently some additional money coming from the developers. And in a way that's still not clear to either Irene or me, the town may be asked in some way to change the resolution we have previously approved. What nobody has explained to us exactly what that would be. What we made clear on the call was that if there is any change to be requested, they have to be mindful of the process the town has to undertake, that we felt we as a council had been very careful to engage residents thoroughly in a whole long process that took months in respect to the initial resolution of the up to 4 million, and that we had to be very mindful of a process that full discussion with residents and among ourselves before and only on the basis of which we could make any change to what we've already been willing to do. And it was really just a message that, you know, don't think you can jam the town here. we really have to do it right. And we have our other aspects of the resolution as well. So that was the message that we left. And it's now up to the county to decide what exactly they're going to be potentially, if anything, asking of us. But in the meantime, they believe that the rest of the pieces have come together and they're all excited and would like to see Bernstein and EYA begin to kick off the serious engineering work. Because of the slippage of time, this would mean that construction would probably not begin till, I remember this properly, late in 2024. And completion of the work associated with lot 24, the lot immediately behind the Farm Women's Market, would be in late, spring of 2027. And then that would flow into the work on lot 10 between Leland and Leland and Walsh, and that wouldn't be complete till November of 2027. So that's the current timeframe. Anyway, so that's where we are. Oh, the one other thing I mentioned, which I thought was interesting, some residents have been very concerned and wanted to make sure that while we don't yet know exactly what amenities will be on the land, that's something that everyone realizes there has to be a complete charrette process for that. So whatever we've seen so far is simply an architect's rendering of what they think might happen. But everyone knows there has to be a public process to determine what amenities could go on the top. But I did ask a question, is whether the garage supporting the 200 car garage for the county, and actually there's another 300 spaces for the public, for the private residents of the new building. So total 500 car garage, that garage could support the planting of canopy trees in the park. And the answer is yes. They are going to make sure that there are wells there so they can plant canopy trees. It won't be anywhere, but that's not surprising. My understanding when these are done is they kind of map out where they will be putting in some extra thick concrete and pillars and support canopy trees in specific locations. But I think that's actually very important because I think the idea that we can have canopy trees in that park looking ahead for generations is very important. It's also the same answer, by the way, that we were given by the developers at 7100, the Corso project, that the garage that they're building will also have the strength to hold canopy trees in different locations. No, it's good. Anyway, are there any questions about that? Or anything else to add at the moment?
Are we going to get a signed piece of paper from the county executive committee?
I think what we get, and I do appreciate the humor. I think what we'll see is when we actually get the, well, there are two documents. One is the amendment to the CIP that I mentioned. The other is that apparently some sort of memorandum of understanding that would be signed by the developers, the county parks department, and the town is also in the works, and we'll see that.
My bet is that will be before July 17th.
Good prospect. I wonder why that date came to your mind.
I don't know. Random thoughts.
Okay, then the next item on the agenda is the adoption of amended procedure governing Maryland Public Information Act requests. Can I turn this over to you, Ron, to walk
Yes.
us through?
So under current law, the town is required to have a policy governing how it processes Public Information Act requests. That state law was amended, and effective July 1, the town needs a policy governing what documents it will proactively disclose. The town is already in compliance with this law because the town proactively discloses certain documents on the town website. So what is proposed here is just to amend the existing town policy with a single sentence that identifies the records we already proactively disclose on the town website.
So is there specific language here that we need to be approving?
Yes, it's shown in red. If you have a copy of the Public Information Act policy from the council packet on page 2, section 1.5, in red, the sentence is added, these records are also proactively disclosed and made available on the town's website. So the
Okay.
new law provides that we have to have a policy, but the town can decide what records are properly or appropriately proactively disclosed. And the town council previously made that determination by identifying 7 categories of items that are immediately available and posted on the town website. So this amendment just complies with the new law by saying these are the records that we're proactively disclosing. And so we're fulfilling the requirement to have a policy on what documents we proactively disclose.
Is there a motion to add this language to our?
Making a motion to add to the amended procedures governing the Maryland Public Information Act requests as so stipulated.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Yeah, I'll second it.
Is there any discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you, Rich. All right.
Thank you and good night.
Then the last item here is on forecast newsletter. Todd, did you want to speak to that?
Sure. In a previous council meeting, the council.
Ron, I think we can let Ron go. Is there anything else that Ron needs?
He's gone.
He's gone.
He doesn't wait around too long for asking.
He wasn't subtle about it, was he?
No, not at all. He never is. A few meetings ago, we discussed continued publication of the forecast newsletter and whether we were going to continue producing it in print or transition to electronic. At that time, council agreed to transition to an electronic version beginning July of this year, which means that the June edition would be the last print edition, but that we would offer residents the opportunity to request paper copies that we would print out at the town office, collate, post, and send to them in hard copy. Unexpectedly, we've had quite a number of people who have requested paper copies. So rather than streamlining town operations, it likely would further unstreamline them. And so the question for council is whether we continue with the paper edition of the forecast until the end of the calendar year and we reconsider it at that time, or whether we determine that we want to transition to fully electronic at that time and notify residents and subsequent issues of the forecast until the end of the year, to remind them that we are transitioning and they need to sign up for the electronic version, or some hybrid approach that we want to consider. But the number of requests we receive for paper copies is just going to require town staff to print all of those on 11x17, collate them, fold them, put them in mailers, and post them. And it's just too much work to do. And it doesn't really streamline operations at all. So it's a discussion about options here, what we'd like to do with the future publication of the forecast.
It's Todd.
What is the cost of doing it now, of the publishing the hard copy?
Per year, Rich, with printing and postage, I think it's around 30,000.
Yeah.
What do you think it would cost the staff to do the work that you said they'd have to do if we deleted it?
It wouldn't cost much, but it's very time consuming to print 11x17 pages, collate them, fold them, post them. It's just not. The whole idea was to streamline operations, and I think this would probably just add more clerical work to the fold. And so, it's easier, obviously, to just send it to the printer. The reasons why we weren't going to do it were, most of the town criers we send out are really weekly forecasts. I mean, we repeat all the information in the town crier that's already in the forecast. In fact, when the forecast goes to the printer, that next town crier is a mirror image of the forecast. And, there are environmental considerations that we took into account, and there were timeliness considerations that we took into account, meaning we have to send the forecast to the printer at least usually 7 to 10 days before the end of the month. Schedules can change in that time. And sometimes we have to, send out town criers indicating or alerting residents that there have been, changes to meeting dates and times and things like that. And so it's inefficient in that respect to do a paper newsletter, but we can consider it a labor of love, or we can.
Do you really consider it that?
I don't know.
Todd, how many requests for hard copies were there? Do you know?
Like 45.
Wow.
A lot. And half of those already subscribe to the town crier in some form. So I'm not certain why they still want paper copy. I mean, I understand an interest in editing for editing and other purposes like that. I want to do paper. I'm still a paper person. And, it might just be a preference, and that's fine. It's just that it creates more work on our end, not less. And so just trying to get a sense of the council as to how we want to proceed here.
Can I suggest something? Would it be possible to reconnect with the 45 requesters and say that, you do realize, especially those that are also signed on for the town crier, that you can print from the town crier on your own printer at home? And given that information, are you still needing a printed forecast to be delivered to you? That might eliminate some, probably not all. The second thought that I had, or along with that, kind of step 2 would be perhaps what could be done once the town forecast is final, which might be like the last day of the month before it's electronically delivered on the 1st of the month, then it be sent to the printer for a very small batch of the letters. Then perhaps instead of folding, collating and all of that and mailing, I don't know how it would be if there was a possibility that they just be hand delivered, because at that point it's 2025, maybe, hopefully. And the rest of the town forecasts can be just in the lobby or in the town hall or something. And the step 3 is that every month, those same people, let's say we're starting from 45, we got down to 35. You deliver 35, and each month those 35 people are asked, okay, since you went through all that, you received your forecast late because you wanted a printed version while everyone else got theirs electronically on the day. Do you still want this, or are you still okay with signing up for the town crier and printing it out yourself? Do you see what I mean? Making it just a little bit harder, because the fact that 45 people have requested this is backing you up and the town staff up by making sure everything is ticked and tied by the certain date of the month so that it arrives in the printer on time and arrives in residents' mailboxes on time. But in effect, because of this request, we should, in my opinion, not stop our process for trying to make sure that the majority of the residents who are absolutely fine with an electronic version, that they receive everything as they should for the first of the month. But everyone else is just a little bit kind of, do you realize that there's another way of getting that information? Does that make sense?
Does.
Joel, do you have a thought?
Yeah, just to add on to that, I mean, I defer to Irene's wisdom and your judgment on how to execute the winnowing down of the 45, but I would caution on slowing down the implementation of an electronic version being sent out. I think we just keep to that, and a hybrid approach, because hybrid seems to be the MO these days. But I think the hybrid approach might be the way to go. And you know, in a way, we kind of anticipated there would need to be this winnowing down over time kind of dynamic, and maybe helping to get more addresses or email addresses from folks through that process. And that may be a way, per Irene's suggestion, to go to the folks, say, hey, you know, do you want this on email? Do we have your right email? Things of that nature, as well, to go there. Sorry that it's burdensome, though. Hopefully it won't be, but I definitely want us to keep on track with the electronic email outflow.
Yes, I agree also. I think we should, you know, there's change is constant. Sometimes it's very difficult to adopt, you know, a new channel of information, but, you know, this is 2022. We should be trying to minimize printing out stuff and the use of paper where we can. And I really think we should stick with our deadline. And, you know, do what we can to make sure that residents know they can get the same information via the town crier, via email.
I'll second.
Joe, when you say stick to the same schedule, do you mean last paper edition will be June?
Yes.
I just have one comment about the ease at which we can convert the electronic version into a printed version. There ought to be some way that, you know, when you pop that page up of the website and then you get to the crier or whatever other publication, it ought to be, there ought to be a banner there that says print here, you know, if you want to print. So make it real easy to have people get a paper copy if they want a paper copy themselves, rather than having the town staff produce it for them.
Yeah, we do send out, you know, we send out not just one, but multiple notifications by town crier of the availability of the forecast. We send a standalone one to the subscription list for the forecast. We include it in the weekly updates And we obviously post it on the website.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I see what you mean. Absolutely.
Yeah, just, I mean, it's, we just send them the electronic version and then they have to go through their own process of figuring out how to print it. A lot of places you can there's just a banner there and it says print here. And then you take all the guesswork out of it for them.
Yeah, I can look into that.
Yeah.
I guess this, couple of things I wanted to say about it. One is that and I appreciate my colleagues all basically want to go ahead and make it electronic. One is I would like to follow up on Irene's thought is whether or not we could have our printer print a small batch. Does that save us much money? Is that something they would be willing to do?
Yeah, I check with them, but my guess is once they proof it and once they press it, it's probably not going to be much of a difference between 100 copies and 2,000, unfortunately. However, I'll qualify that. I do understand that paper has gone up exorbitantly, the price of paper. So it may be the fact that they're printing electronically now. It could be substantially less. And if we only did 50 to perhaps 100, it could be significantly less. So all I can say is let me check into that.
Let me check into it, because also that would address your concern about staff overload.
Right.
And so even if it doesn't save that much money, it addresses the immediate concern you have. And then it does allow us to work down the number over time, which we should be able to do.
Yeah.
The issue of hand delivery.
I can't hear you, Dave. What's that?
No, that would still be a good idea to mail them.
Yeah,
Okay.
if we do it if we wait until the end of the month and have to hand deliver them, I mean, that's gonna be pretty taxing. on
You're not mailing
staff to get those.
Okay, but if alternatively 25 or 30 are addressed and mailed, that's not so horrible, especially if it's already been printed out. So I should
We'll
think
just give the printer labels for the 50.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Okay, good. The other thought they had, which was the upside of eventually having electronic fully, is that it does also allow more flexibility in the format and color and other things, which could just make the whole experience of looking at the forecast more vivid. And obviously with links, or just the things that actually get people jazzed. As I think, Todd, you and I were discussing, that forecast format probably hasn't changed for quite a while.
Because it's so beautiful.
It's already perfect, and you can't improve perfection. I understand, but I think that could benefit from, there'd be flexibility to do things if it went to electronic. But the one thing I want to offer as a caution, one of the things we've become painfully aware of, any of us who've been on the council know this, is how often we have to rerun commercials before we can be confident that residents have read things. And I'm not, one of the values about a forecast arriving in the mail and getting it is it just gives that much more assurance that people actually, oh, wow, really? That's happening this weekend? Or which they don't always see when they just have a whole slew of emails they're just trawling through. So there is that loss. And I'm not suggesting that's compelling reason to change our minds, but I'm just very mindful of how often and how we have to think carefully about what it takes to reach residents, especially if you're only going to rely on electronic communication, how many times you have to go after it, and what you need to do with banner headlines, and not just for printing, but just generally to make people aware that this is what's occurring and to really do it. And I think and one of the points about communication in the town is that I think the new format for the weekly updates is great. We got the different subject matters and you go to them, but we're going to probably find it's necessary to say something more on the front page, if you will, so that people get a better sense of the content and they're willing to actually, go to the link and look more deeply into it. But in any event, I think in terms of, I think the consensus of the council is to basically stay the course. If you told us though, Todd, you needed another, let's say we're talking about through July, right? Or ending in June?
Ending in June. June edition will be the last print edition.
Okay. Would since we don't print in August, is it helpful to have July also be in print, just to extend it 1 month?
You can do that. Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, and then start the new
And
year.
it started in September, yeah.
As long as there's a concerted effort to go after the 45, reconnect with the 45.
Right.
Not go
And that could-
after.
So if we do that over the summer, then by September, that may be a smaller list anyway. Yeah. All right. So I think that's the consensus, one more month. But yes, we'll stay the course and convert to electronic. But
Very
with the
good.
option of printing a small batch, so it takes the burden off of you guys. Okay, thank you. If that's all for on the agenda for this council, are there any other issues to bring up? I will want to say for the next council meeting, we'll probably have some discussion of cell towers, 5G, something Irene will be getting up to speed on. Since the next council meeting will be coming very shortly after the presentation from Corso, I'm sure we'll have that as an agenda item as well. And if by that time we actually do know what, if anything, the county wants from the town in regard to the Farm Women's Market, that also will be an issue for us to bring up. So that could become
You're promising a longer meeting. Is that what you?
it may be a longer meeting, that's right. But with that, I think that's all for tonight, unless there's anything else. Thank you all very much and look forward to the next 2 years. Rich, glad you're on board.
Thank you. Good
Now you can
night.
go to sleep.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you all very much.